Hi, Steve Kirby here again. This video is the second one in the Limber training series, which will be on the aescripts YouTube channel. The first one dealt with making new limbs, changing lengths, duplicating limbs, all that kind of stuff, FK and what have you. And this one is a bit more in depth. We're going to cover how to get artwork from external sources or from other layers in After Effects that you may have created inside your limbs so that you can style them in new and different ways. It's a bit more advanced than the previous one. So we're going to assume in this video that you're pretty familiar with After Effects, that you understand shape layers and how they work, and that you've probably had some experience of working with Limber already. So with that in mind, let's get started. Okay, so the rig and pose button actually contains two functions in one button because they can be used in combination at the same time together. But we're going to start with talking about the pose function. So as you're probably aware, Limber's tapered limbs are based on a geometry of three circles. You can kind of sense the three circles getting bigger and smaller here. And obviously those three circles correspond to the sizes of the start size, middle size, and end size. So the pose function works on three circular layers that you would place where you want your limb to go. So here I have this character. It's a Troggoth, which was designed by Games Workshop as part of their Warhammer game. And I have made some arms in Illustrator. You can see that they're just on one layer, both arms. And I also have some legs somewhere there. And then in addition to those legs and arms, I've placed a bunch of circles where the three parts of the limbs need to go. So we've got 12 circles in total. So let's just show you how I would go about doing this left arm here. I would select my three circle layers in order, and that would need to be the hip or the shoulder one first, the one that's closest to the body, and then working my way down through the joint to the end. So I've selected those three circles. I'll just solo them again for you. And now that I've got them selected in the right order, I can click Rig and Pose, and it brings up this new Rig and Pose options panel, which gives you an opportunity to sort of change your mind and shows you what's selected for what, and will give you a description of what's about to happen. So this diagram on the left of this kind of green limb representation, which has three circles and two other kind of layers in between. On this occasion, we're not using those ones because those art layer drop downs are for when you use the rig function. But just for posing, then you really just need to set these three circles, and they've all got the right one selected already in the drop down. It tells me it's going to create a new limb. You can pose existing limbs, but obviously we don't have any limbs at the moment, so we're using the pose to generate a new limb and pose it. And when I click OK, it's going to ask me for a name. I'll call this one left and click OK again. And Limber's now gone and made a new limb exactly where those three circles were, and with the qualities. I don't know if you noticed, but the circle at the bottom was a slightly different color, so my limb has been assigned that color to its lower color value, and that means I could now just sort of trim this split a little bit and then use the rounding to kind of, you know, make it look a bit better, more like the original design. And then obviously I would want to put my limb layer where it needs to go. So if I drag it down next to the arms, I can turn the arms layer off, the one that was made in Illustrator. And you can see that now I'm kind of like, you know, pretty much in the same sort of state as the original design, except I don't have those art layers in there. The rig function works in a similar way, but you need to select shape layers for the upper art and or the lower art layer. Obviously, if you're designing in Illustrator like this, then you will need to convert your Illustrator layers into shape layers. So let's just show you with these two layers here that are the left arm, upper art and lower art. I can convert them into shape layers by right clicking and then going create shapes from vector layer like that. Another method, of course, is to use something like explode shape layers or perhaps even overlord. Those are both great tools, which I suggest you check out. They do speed up the process a little bit, but if you don't have those, you can do it via the method I just showed you with the create shapes from vector layer command. And then I would need to select those two art layers, starting with the upper and then the lower. Then I'm going to select one of my limb layers. I'll select the wrists up there. Then I'll click rig and pose again, and we see the options panel again, except this time we know it knows that I've selected a limb, so it's saying selected limb, left arm, and it's pre-populated the art layer drop downs with those two layers. So that's all correct, and I can click on OK, and it has now transferred that artwork into the limb. So the art layers as they were have been turned off, and the limb has now got that art right inside it. So I can move my arm around and the art is going to follow, it's going to stretch, and I can use all the dynamics and the FK, the FK and everything, and it's all going to work completely seamlessly with the rest of my limb like that. Let's just undo. There we go. If you want to use both functions at the same time, you can do. I will show you how to do that with the right arm. So let's select these three right arm layers in the right order. And then normally you would also then perhaps select your upper art and your lower art. But I actually haven't converted those ones to shape layers. So let's just do that first. So that's arm, lower art. We will create shapes from vector layer for those. Then I'm going to go select 1, 2, 3 and rig and pose. And then I'm going to actually add those art layers manually in here. So the upper art layer is going to be right arm upper, and then the lower art is going to be right arm lower. That's there, and it's going to create a new limb. I'll click OK. This one I'll call right, and bam, it's done. So now I have the art rigged in those layers. You can't see it on the bottom one because I need to change the splits a little bit. So let's pull that back up to there and round it that way, like that. I think probably on this occasion I'm going to want the lower group on top of the upper like that. That looks better. And then let's pull that right arm back down to somewhere perhaps just behind the torso. And then now, I'm not going to rig my hand or anything, but you can see that that arm moves around, stretches just like the other one does. So we can now carry on with rigging the rest of our character and the other two legs. Or, you know, if we'd got the artwork exactly the same, in this case it's not symmetrical, but you know, if I've got my right wrist here and I wanted to use the same arm the other side, make things really fast, I can just click duplicate, call it something else, and then I've got another arm which of course is exactly the same and still contains the artwork and everything. So once you've rigged your limb layer, it behaves exactly like any other custom limb layer. So obviously with this Troggoth character, the style of the limbs is very amenable to Limber's taper limbs, but not all characters are quite so straightforward in terms of how they look and the style of them and how you might then get rigged artwork into them. So I've got some other examples to show you with sort of different challenges and different ways of approaching rigging artwork into limbs. So the first of those is this couple designed by Jones & Co., which is the portfolio of Dylan Jones. Thanks very much, Dylan, for letting me use these characters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just rig the guy's legs, which are fairly straightforward, but they've got, you know, slightly more challenges involved than the Troggoth. So let's zoom in and I'll show you that all I've really done to Dylan's Illustrator file is separate out the legs into these different layers here like this, upper and lower, although the one on the right of the screen is actually just one big long shape. And I've also added some circle reference layers for using the pose function. because that's just going to make the demo a lot quicker than manually positioning the limbs. So let's start with this left leg, and I'll select these 3 layers in order. Oops, that's where I should mention that it will create a new limb when you generate a limb with the rig and pose based on the drop down you have here selected, the names. So if I select leg, it's going to give the layers the right name. So now if I click rig and pose, I've got hip, knee and ankle. I can click OK. That's going to want to be left. I can click OK again, and that's made me a new limb. It looks like that, which is all fine. I probably, however, want to sort of trim that bottom bit. Okay, so what I mean by that is if we take this split down to here where the turn up is, we could then turn off the other half of the split. So let's just do that, and I'll show you what I mean. If I come in my colors, let's make the lower color something completely different. And then if I pull that lower split down a bit lower, so it's where the turn up is, I can now go inside the limb layer, and in the lower group, the distal lower is the red one. I can just turn that off. So now we've got a sort of invisible part of the bottom of the limb, but that's cool because we're going to rig the artwork into that section. I could have deleted that distal lower group, but I just turned it off. So I'll pull this left leg down to below the other left leg layers, and then this lower one, which is where we've got the artwork, that's going to need to be converted into a vector shape. But actually we're probably going to have to do the same thing with all of the legs. So let's just do all of them in one go. Create shapes from vector layer like that. Actually, I think I'll delete the old Illustrator ones to make the timeline a bit clearer. And then this left leg upper we don't need because we've basically got the limb replacing that. So it's just this left leg lower outlines that I want to rig into that limb. So I'll select the limb and click rig and pose. It's assigned the artwork to the upper art drop down, which is wrong. It needs to be in the lower art drop down. So if I just change that, Limber will kind of kill it from the other one because you can't have the same layer selected in 2 drop downs. And then I'll click OK, and that's now basically just added that artwork straight into the limb there. So if I parent my left shoe to my left ankle, you'll see that that's all rigged up and kind of working how we might expect. So let's go and do the other leg. So I have this right hip, right knee and right ankle reference layers. Remember, there are those 3 circles, and selected in that order, starting with the hip. Then I still want a leg. I'm going to click rig and pose. That's all correct, but that's not because it's the right hand side this time. So that's made me a limb right there, and you can see again that this bit is coming down a bit too low. So I'll go through that process again of just making this a funny color and moving the split down, and then inside the limb I will kill that distal lower again like that. I could have just duplicated the other limb, but it would have brought all the artwork and everything along with it. And if we were in a real hurry, that probably would have been good enough, but I'm trying to do this as faithfully to the original artwork as possible. So now that we've got the right leg kind of set up, I'll pull that down to there. And then at this stage, we could rig both the upper art and the lower art, but the upper art really is just this shadow. And since shadows don't really move with legs a lot of the time because it's, you know, cast light, a better way to do that is probably going to be to just mat it to the limb layer and sort of just attach it to the master null of the character or whatever. So I'm actually going to go in, delete that group, which was the main sort of bit of leg. Then this shadow, I'm going to make it a bit bigger, like this. Maybe even put that up there. And then I'm going to put a set matte effect on it and set the set matte effect to take the matte from the limb layer of the right leg. So now when I move the limb around, that shadow will kind of behave more or less as it should do. But let's get the rest of the artwork into the lower part of the right leg. So I've got my right leg, and then if I select my right leg lower outlines, that's the art layer. You can see those 2 layers there. I can then click rig and pose, and again it's assigned it to the wrong drop down, so I'll have to change and put this layer 15 into the lower drop down there. So that's now correct. Click OK, And that's now added in that artwork to my right leg lower. So let's parent the right shoe to the right ankle. The right shoe is going to need to come down in our timeline stack to where the right leg is, maybe even behind it like that. Oh no, perhaps not. So just in front of it. And then I probably should have turned up the rotate end before I did that, but let's just show you that that all sort of moves around and passes behind the other leg as it should do. What we did do when we rigged up that right leg was we actually included that that sort of shape that was the leg itself, this big kind of area here. And so that's now inside. You can see the outlines there. It's very similar to our limber, expression generated limb. So we might want to get rid of that. So we could come into the limb layer here. It's probably the bottom one. So if oh no, it's not. Group 5 is going to be the sock. Then there's, what's group 4? Yes, I think it's group 4. So if I kill that group 4 there, you'll see that that's now gone and we've got this kind of more pure limber limb, but the sock is poking out above the turn up. So probably the easiest way to fix that is just to simply redraw it, right? I mean, these are all just vectors. So if I select my pen tool, I can just come and get these two points on that sock and just pull that down below the turn up, and then that's all fine. If I wanted to, I could play around making this shadow bigger. You can see that we're not really seeing the change because it's behind the other limb. But obviously, thinking about how I did the other shadow, it might make more sense for the shadow to not actually be part of the limb layer, but to perhaps even be somehow sort of a separate layer that's got set matte on it and is attached to the other leg or something. It really depends on what we're doing with our animation, but for the time being, I'm just going to leave that as it is and show you how that kind of, then goes correctly behind there and everything. So that's basically it for those characters. Well, rather for that guy's legs. I'm not going to rig the rest of those characters. The next character that I want to show you is this Pink Panther animation, which I've been copying from the original by Richard Williams. And I haven't done very much of it, but I have animated a little bit using shape layers and limber bones. I have a reference video, which I think I probably took from that very YouTube video underneath here. But now that I've got to this stage, I've decided that I want my limbs to look more like the original ones and have that kind of subtle curvature and kind of organic curve tapering to them. So you can't rig artwork to bones by default. There is a riggable bone in the limb library, but I'm actually going to use a slightly different method to put my own artwork in these. I know that I want to just pretty much draw this shape of these legs over the top of this reference and then add that to my limb layer, but I don't particularly need the bone to still be there. But I do need to know kind of where those 3 points are of the hip and knee and ankle so that I can draw around them in the right way. So a good way of doing that is to import something from the limb library, which will help with sort of placing those 3 points. So in the limb library, there is something called 3 circles. And that's basically just a limb without any sort of the parts that join the circles together. So if I take this limb layer here and click copy, and then come back into my Pink Panther comp, and if I select this leg, let's take the right leg, and then I'm going to hold down Alt and click paste. I need to hold Alt because I don't want all of the colours and lengths and everything from this limb. I don't want an exact copy of this limb. I kind of just want what's in the limb layer itself, but I want that to respond to the settings that I've already made in my limber effect. So you can see that I've already gone and made my 3 colours pink, and I've change my start, middle, and end size so that that leg, that leg kind of corresponds to how it might be. You know, these circles here are a little bit bigger than the middle one. So now that I've got that, I could use a combination of that and the reference layer to draw over, right? So what we might do is make this reference layer a slightly different color so I can see it a bit better. So I've just put a hue adjustment on there. And then I want to make sure that my leg is also very visible. So I'll copy that effect and pop it on my limb layer, but this time I'll just change the hue to something else like yellow. I guess I can use the controllers as reference as well, but I still need to see that knee. So now that I can clearly see the 3 points of my limb and see the reference layer for the shape that I want, I can just go ahead and click out of there. I need to make sure I don't have any layers selected, and then using my pen tool, I'll start with just a stroke. So I'll just turn the stroke on here, and I'll just disable the fill, and let's make it quite thin. So just a 2 pixel stroke, and then I can compose my sort of limb shapes. So if I just put a point here, something like this, I might add one around the top there, but I'm going to put one there. Obviously, this isn't going to be exactly following the artwork from the reference layer because, you know, my limbs aren't in precisely the same place as the ones in the video. You can see this, you know, would be slightly higher up if I was following that. So I need to pay attention to where my circles are, where my kind of geometry is, rather than the video. I'm kind of interpreting that shape and changing it. So that's one there. And then let's deselect that, and then I'll start drawing another one. So this one here might have a point there and a point there. And then if I come up here, and it's got to go all the way around there. So let's put a point something like that, and then maybe another one here. And then perhaps when I join up with there, we'll get something like what we want. You can try and make sure that this rotates around my circle, like I said before, though. So I think this is probably a bit big. Just going to pull that back a bit. Maybe that one should be there. Maybe that one should be there. So this shape here, I kind of want this to be a bit like a circle. You're never really going to see it, but I think that's going to work better. And then obviously the joint is quite important because these two things are going to rotate around one another. I might need to add another point in there, but I think I can probably just about get away with it if I do that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So, I mean, one thing I could do, of course, is just simply increase this circle size so that it kind of covers up that joint. And sometimes that works better. Rather than actually drawing around the circle, I could just draw up to the circle. But let's see how we get on like this. So now that I've drawn those two layers, let's give them a name. So that's the up art, and then this would be the low art, let's say. I'm going to zoom out, and obviously at the moment they're strokes, and we don't really want them to be strokes, we want them to be fills. So let's give them a fill, this one too, like this. We could leave the stroke on, or we could turn it off. Let's leave it on for now. And then I can now come back to my right leg and select the upper art and then the lower art as well as the right leg. And when I click rig and pose, it's going to pre-populate those art layer drop downs correctly. And when I click OK, it will transfer that artwork over to the leg. It's gone yellow because my limb layer has still got that color shift effect on it. So if I just turn that off, you'll see that now the artwork is perfectly inside the limb. So hopefully, as my character animates, I now get pretty much what I wanted. I can see that there's a problem with my hip, which is that it's fine here, but then when I come over to these parts of the animation, it's bulging out, and obviously something like that doesn't look right at all. So I'm going to have to kind of make some changes there, but the way the knee is working is pretty good, and the way the ankle's working is pretty good so far. So it's really just going to be a matter of maybe changing that hip so that it tapers kind of much more towards the joint like that perhaps, and then it'll always be kind of on the inside towards his bum like that. That's already looking quite a bit better. So you can see from those demonstrations that with the rig and pose functions, Limba really has great flexibility in terms of not just working with different art styles, but also different design processes. You can plan ahead and be very structured, in Adobe Illustrator, and then bring your layers over and very, very quickly get a character up and animatable. Or you can work more intuitively with After Effects native toolset and then inject those shapes that you've made right there in the composition panel into your limbs and get them animating that way. And once you have everything in a limb layer, of course, because it's a single shape layer, you then have access to all of Limba's great kind of management sort of utilities, like the ability to duplicate everything very quickly or copy and paste it and so on. And you're going to be able to use all of those nice dynamic properties like the blending and the anti-pop, the forward kinematics, and so on. So keep an eye on the aescripts YouTube channel, because there will be more videos about Limba. There is a specific Limba playlist on there. Unfortunately, I don't think YouTube has the ability to subscribe to a playlist, but if you keep an eye on the channel, you should see new Limba videos when they go up. And see you next time.